Wall Street is eagerly awaiting Fed Chair Jay Powell's testimony today, his first appearance before Congress in 9 months. It coincides with a hot streak of economic data and stubbornly high inflation. Let's discuss what to expect with American Action Forum President Doug Holtz-Eakin. Doug, it's good to see you as always. So as we await Powell's testimony today, obviously he's trying to thread the needle here. The markets kind of come around to what the Fed has been saying, that it's going to keep raising rates. Do you think that the Fed has sort of, because it is now more in line with the market, that is a good thing, that it's sort of gotten its credibility back?
Well, I think it's a good thing that the market has accepted the reality that the Fed is going to raise rates. I mean, there were months where the disconnect between what the market was pricing for the terminal rate and what the Fed was saying were just, basis points apart. So this is good news. The reality is that the Fed hasn't made great progress on inflation. Their preferred measure, the personal consumption expenditure price index, if you look at the market-based core for that, it was at 4.9 in April of 22, right when they began the tightening cycle. It was at 4.9 last time we got a reading. So they've made no real progress on especially services inflation, and they're focused on the labor market primarily because they believe the wage increases pass straight through to be the top cost driver in the service sector. So I expect today that they will try to get him to commit to a soft landing. He can't do that. They will do their very best, but I still think the balance of odds are that late this year we have a really increased chance for a downturn as a result of the Fed tightening.
And let me just follow up to that. We get some data points later this week from Nonfarm payrolls. That's a big monthly employment report. And then next week's CPI. Do you think that's going to move the needle either way?
I expect the employment report will. The January employment report, I thought should be taken seriously, but not literally. A lot of those numbers just did not make any sense. The annualized growth rate of payrolls in there was about 20%, but it indicated strength in the labor market. So we need another month's data to see just how strong the labor market remains. And again, it's not that the Fed gets out of bed just hoping to put Americans out of work. What they are concerned about is the tightness in the labor market, making it impossible for them to get back to their 2% target. So that's the primary, I think, focus for the Fed. The CPI will give you one more piece of information, which is shelter inflation. Shelter inflation is the problem. It's at 7.9% year over year. It has risen every month since February of 2021. And you can't get to a 2% target if you've got 1/3 of the CPI rising at 8% per year. That has to start topping out and moving south soon, or the Fed's really got a problem on their hands.
Well, and this kind of goes to what you said earlier, Doug, which is that so far what the Fed has been doing is not working, or certainly it's not working enough. Is that something to do with the particular sources of inflation this time, like shelter, for example, like wages, for example? Is it something to do with, is it sort of more existential that the Fed's just tools are limited in general? Or, kind of how are you thinking about that?
Well, on the tools front, I mean, their tools are limited. The federal funds rate is an incredibly blunt instrument to try to slow the pace of demand in the economy. And so they push it up and see how it spreads to all classes of credit and all maturities. And that's a very imprecise process. It gets an additional piece of help here with the quantitative tightening, but that's brand new. So they don't really have a great feel for how that translates into financial tightening. So they're operating with a tool set that's very imprecise, in some cases new. I think what they've learned is their two-part strategy: get to neutral as fast as possible, and then impose restrictive monetary policy for just as long as necessary. They didn't know where neutral was. And it turns out we aren't at neutral yet. We haven't actually gotten to the point where we're starting to slow the economy. We're not in the restrictive phase for sure. And so they're just learning a little bit about this economy and the tools they're using in 2023.
No, we are not seeing the effects of that restriction just yet. And I want to switch gears over to the budget. President Biden introducing his new budget. What can we expect here?
Well, I think you can expect more of the same. His first budget was an extraordinary tax and spend budget that took taxes to the highest levels in the post-war and spending to the highest levels as a fraction of GDP ever in the United States. I don't expect that the character of that budget to change. There will be some particulars. They're leaking out this morning that they have a Medicare rescue plan that consists of raising the Affordable Care Act's net investment income tax from 3.8 to 5% and broadening it to include more income. So They promised that will take care of Medicare for the next 2 decades, but that's really using a tool that's never been used in Medicare before. It's not a particularly good piece of tax policy. I think we're going to see more of that as we get closer to the release date.
On the flip side, as he writes about this plan today in the New York Times as well as on the White House website, and talks about that. The other side of the aisle frequently talks about that the way to save Medicare is by cutting back on programming. What do you think is the best way to address budget shortfalls with Medicare?
The reality for both Medicare and for the larger budget is that it is these large mandatory spending programs, entitlements, that are driving the fiscal outlook. They're growing at 6 and 7% per year over the next 10 years, and we're not going to have a revenue source that grows that fast. So you're never going to get into anything that looks like a steady state until you bring that growth rate down. You can't just promise economic growth and have it solve itself. You can't tax your way out of this. And that doesn't mean cutting. It means slowing the growth of. And Medicare especially was never set up to be financially self-sustaining. 3/4 of parts B, C, and D are taxpayer financed. Only a quarter are covered by the premiums. It's responsible for 1/3 of the federal debt outstanding all by itself. So that program needs to be put on a more sound financial footing to survive in the future. And we're long overdue in addressing that. There's simply no way around it.
All right, we have to leave it there, but really appreciate your insights here. American Action Forum President Doug Holtz-Eakin, thank you for joining us.